First Blood is one of the greatest action movies ever made. This is not because it has the greatest action set pieces or the most badass fight choreography, although for its time it does score highly in both those categories. First Blood is one of the greatest action movies because its action has a purpose. It delivers a powerful message. The film's action is great as action alone, but it also has a subtext, a meaning that is revealed through the action sequences and the film as a whole. First Blood poses a serious question, and by the end of the film, it answers it. That question being, who drew first blood?
They drew first blood, not me.
Sorry, I couldn't resist that. The real question at the heart of First Blood is, how should we treat our veterans? Most action films have a premise that goes something like,
they kidnapped his daughter, and he will stop at nothing to get her back.
Or,
they kidnapped his whole family, and now he's really pissed.
Or,
they kidnapped him, and...
Actually, I don't know the plot of Taken 3, I never saw it. My point is that the premise of most action films doesn't reach far outside the personal interest of the protagonist, or if it does, it is simply an existential threat. The good guy must win or the world gets blowed up. Rarely do action films make a relevant or compelling point about real-world politics and real-world lives. However, First Blood does. First Blood is based on the novel of the same name by David Morrell, published a decade before the film's release in 1972. The novel was written during the height of debate regarding the Vietnam War, and served as a dramatic exploration of the clashing ideologies of the time. The Vietnam War sparked what grew to be the largest anti-war movement in the US up to that point. This movement was a reaction to the US involvement in what seemed to be a futile and unwinnable war, causing massive casualties on both sides, and the first draft lottery since World War II, which forced young citizens who did not support the war to fight and die for it. The anti-war movement of the 1960s and 70s had understandable motives, but the movement also misdirected some of its vitriol and rage at targets who were not responsible for the war, these being veterans. Some articles claim the ill treatment of Vietnam vets by the anti-war movement has been exaggerated. However, whether by saliva or more subtle affronts, many first-hand accounts attest that returning vets did bear the brunt of civilian resentment toward the war. Perhaps even worse than this, vets were not treated well by the system that had asked them to fight in the first place. The US government provided very little in the way of benefits or a support system for vets returning from the Vietnam War, and as a result, many vets found themselves jobless and homeless, discarded by the country they had risked everything to protect. The character of John Rambo in First Blood represents one of these discarded veterans. Upon the film's release in 1982, the wounds of Vietnam were still healing, and the conflict addressed by the novel was still playing out in the US, albeit to a lesser degree. As the opening credits roll, we see Rambo trekking to the home of his friend and former team member in Vietnam. Rambo soon discovers his friend has died of cancer, caused by exposure to Agent Orange during the war.
Brought it back from Nam. All that orange stuff, they spread it around. Cut him down to nothing.
Dejected, Rambo makes his way to the nearby town, the fictional town of Hope, Washington. In reality, the film was shot in the town of Hope, British Columbia. In town, Rambo encounters the local sheriff, Will Teasel, and this is where the film's conflict begins. Every good script needs a conflict, two views or ideologies that clash against each other, fighting for dominance through the narrative. In First Blood, the clash occurs between Rambo and Teasel. A simple approach would have been to write Teasel as a local tough guy, a man who simply didn't understand the horrors of war or the impact it had on veterans. But in fact, Teasel is more complex than this. Like Rambo, Sheriff Teasel is also a veteran. Teasel fought in the Korean War of the 1950s. His clash with Rambo is caused mainly by a generational divide. In Teasel's war, men served, returned home, got respectable jobs, and did not complain or question their country. At least, that is the way I imagine Teasel sees it. Teasel doesn't resent the US involvement in the Vietnam War, he resents that his country lost the war. He blames Rambo's generation for this, and all the returning vets who now have the audacity to question why they fought and died. He resents what's now called the Vietnam Syndrome. Teasel represents the old American war culture, and sees Rambo as complicit with the new war counterculture, despite the fact that he is basing this belief solely on Rambo's appearance.
You know, wearing that flag on that jacket, looking the way you do, you're asking for trouble around here, friend.
Rambo is not an anti-war activist. He is simply a veteran having difficulty adjusting to civilian life. Rambo doesn't completely know how he feels about the war or the resentment he encounters in his home country. During the first act of First Blood, Rambo is still processing all of this and trying to understand it. As the film progresses and the proverbial shit hits the fan, Rambo comes closer and closer to finding himself. Rambo's progression, his hero's journey, occurs through 5 great action sequences, each with their own purpose within the narrative. After refusing to leave town, Rambo is arrested and detained by Teasel and the Hope Police Department. Teasel and his even bigger of an asshole buddy, Galt, use way more force and aggression than necessary, and eventually this tips the already unstable Rambo over the edge. Rambo experiences flashbacks from his time in a North Vietnamese POW camp. Reliving this trauma causes Rambo to momentarily revert back to the soldier he once was, and thus he escapes this hostile territory. First Blood is a rare early action movie that depicted the symptoms of PTSD. The glimpses we get into Rambo's mind reveal the psychological toll the war cost him. The Hope Police Department is completely oblivious to this, as were most people at the time, and in pushing Rambo over the edge, they force him across a first threshold. The jail escape and ensuing motorcycle chase mark a point of no return for Rambo. The war he hoped to escape is now pursuing him. Rambo's intention is not to harm the officers, only to free himself. He still seeks a path of peace because he knows the alternative is to cross a line that cannot be uncrossed. For this reason, Rambo seeks a peaceful resolution when the police catch up to him, but Galt intends to do more than capture Rambo. In self-defense, Rambo throws a stone at Galt's helicopter, which results in his death. The real reason for the death was Galt hanging out of the chopper window like an idiot. Despite Rambo's intentions, a second threshold has been crossed. The war found him, and now Rambo has no choice but to embrace it and return to himself. During the forced attack, Rambo has come home. He discards the false mask of his civilian life and returns to his true identity. He is a soldier, a weapon. He lives in the forest, the jungle, the battlefield, while the officers who pursue him are only tourists there. They are trespassing on his domain, and thus he gives them a warning.
I could have killed them all. I could have killed you. Been telling you the law. Out here it's me. Don't push it.
Rambo has accepted who he is, but some part of him still sees the glimmer of hope for another life. Therefore, he does not kill the officers, even though he could have. The arrival of Colonel Trotman introduces the only character in the film who truly understands who and what Rambo is. He was there with Rambo in Vietnam. In fact, you could say he made Rambo.
God didn't make Rambo. I made him.
At this point, Trotman is the only character who can break through to Rambo, and thus he represents Rambo's one remaining lifeline, the distant glimmer of redemption. After the forest battle, Rambo is attacked again, but this time he faces an insurmountable force. Teasel has called in the National Guard, forcing Rambo to retreat into an unused mine. When the far less trained guard soldiers fire a rocket launcher on the mine, the shaft collapses, and Rambo is presumed dead.
Woo! Yeah! Hoo-ah! Give that man a cigar! Bullseye!
Of course he isn't. Rambo is a true survivor. His mission cannot be derailed so easily. Rambo's journey through the cave is a pretty literal reference to the innermost cave of Joseph Campbell's monomyth. It is an ordeal during which Rambo must touch the rock bottom of his soul so that he may be reborn, rising like a phoenix from the ashes of this underworld. When Rambo emerges from the cave, his direction and purpose are absolute. The previously defensive soldier now goes on the offensive. Rambo's mission is no longer simple survival. He has declared war on the town of Hope, and all those who hunted him, especially Teasel. Rambo embraces this war and his inevitable end in it. In the final battle, Rambo's mission goes as planned. He finds the kingshit cop, Teasel, at the police station and takes him out. As the station is surrounded by officers and soldiers, it seems Rambo will find the warrior's death he seeks. But the only person who can prevent this ending does. As I said earlier, Trotman is Rambo's last lifeline and last pathway to redemption. When Trotman confronts Rambo, the floodgates open. All of Rambo's frustration, rage, and humanity are voiced in what I believe might be the most heart-wrenching speech in any action movie. I wish I could show you all of it, but YouTube wouldn't like that.
My friend, it's all over me. It's got blood and everything, and I'm trying to hold them together. I put them together, fucking intestines keep coming out, and nobody would help.
If anyone doubts that Stallone can act, I recommend they watch this scene. In the scene, Rambo breaks down and bares his soul. He is a soldier who fought for his nation because he believed in it. During the war, Rambo went above and beyond the call of duty. He became the best soldier he could have been. He put his life on the line and watched his closest friends die, blown to pieces right in front of him. Rambo will never escape these memories, and thus he sacrificed his own mind in the war.
Can't get it out of my head. I do this 7 years. Every day it happens. Sometimes I wake up, I don't know where I am.
When Rambo returned home, he was spit on and ridiculed by people he had sacrificed everything to protect. They didn't approve of the war he fought in, but were ignorant of his role in it. All of Rambo's achievements and skills during the war counted for nothing here. Many agree that the US involvement in the Vietnam War was a mistake and caused many more deaths than necessary. But soldiers like Rambo did not create the war or devise its goals. Soldiers like Rambo are only guilty of doing what their country asked of them. Rambo's country made him into a weapon, then discarded the human being the weapon was forged from. Exposing the humanity behind the soldier is the underlying purpose of First Blood. The film makes a case for the better understanding and treatment of veterans, and it does so through awesome action sequences. Sure, the Rambo of later entries in the franchise was a bit more of an over-the-top superhero. Rambo of 2008 took the franchise back to its roots to some extent, but it wasn't nearly as compelling as the original in my opinion. As I record this video, Rambo Last Blood will be released in a few days, so I can only hope it does the original film justice. If you did see Last Blood and First Blood, I would love to hear your thoughts on how the final Rambo film compares with the first, as well as your thoughts on this video. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more movie breakdowns and analysis. Check out these other videos and never forget who drew First Blood.
They drew first blood, not me. They drew first blood.
Until next time.